All right. Good morning, Doug. We're back with questions from members of the file. First question here is, who do you think will end up being the Democratic candidate for president? I can't see it being Joe Biden, especially after his upcoming debate with Trump, if it's even allowed to happen. And Trump hasn't been taken out before the election. I mean, we saw just recently at the G7 meeting, I don't know if you saw these videos of Biden wandering around, clearly confused. And it is elder abuse at this point. How can this
Yeah.
guy be president?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I would make a substantial bet that Biden will not even be nominated, or if he's nominated, he'll back out before he runs. So uh, they're not going to do that because these Jacobins don't want to lose the reins of power, and they recognize that running either Biden or Kamala would be the kiss of death to the presidency. Okay, so who are they going to put up? The name that everybody talks about is, I think, Gavin Newsom. He's very presentable, speaks well, got a lot of name recognition. That's important. So I guess that's where you put your money. Some people say Michelle, but it seems that too many people hate her and are suspicious of her for that to be the case. But there's more to this story. Everybody's sure that Trump is going to run for the Republicans, but wait a minute. What if something happens to Trump, either natural or unnatural, in between now? Who are the Republicans going to put up? Well, they got Ted Cruz and little Marco Rubio and people like that. But with either of these parties, it seems to me that you can pick somebody out of the grab bag of possible candidates. We probably don't even know most of their names. Certainly with the Democrats, we don't know most of their names, I think. And with the media machine as it is, sell them to the American people. I mean, in the old days, conventions would often pick somebody that the hoi polloi had never even heard of before. Republicans, Democrats would put them up and they'd campaign, and nobody had ever heard of this guy before because there was no such thing as a national media. So that could happen again. And certainly with the Democrats, since they have total control of the media and talking heads and this type of thing, they'll find somebody. They'll pick somebody who's presentable and acceptable. The Republicans, I don't know what they would do. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I don't know about the Republicans, but I definitely think I just can't see it being Joe Biden at this point. I mean, it feels like they're trying to push him out, at this point by putting him on stage so much over the last couple months. I don't know. It seems like some people, maybe there's a little battle internally, for getting him out there, but I just think he's not going to make it. And I think the other thing is if they have just any other person in there, anyone at all, if there's shenanigans with the election again, then they would have plausible deniability at least. But if they have Biden in there, like nobody can say how this guy could win at this stage.
That's exactly the way I see it too. They'll put somebody up that's somehow acceptable and plausible deniability for all the stupid things the Democrats have done and the bad things, the directions that the country's, well, that was Biden's fault. And, he was over the hill. So they'll put up some new guy and have a media blitz. So it seems to me that the odds of the Democrats winning, when you look at that, are actually fairly high.
All right.
But we can't pick the warm body at this point other than Gavin Newsom. But maybe they'll pick somebody who's a fresh face and just promote the hell out of him. Name recognition.
The thing with like someone like Gavin is that he would actually perform well on the debate stage with Trump as compared to almost anyone else because he is smooth and he would be pretty good at that. compared to like if they put up Hillary again or something, somebody like that, who is just very unlikable and not very smooth on her feet.
Yeah, nobody really hates Gavin Newsom the way a lot of people viscerally hate, for good reason, Hillary. So yeah, good shot at that. Anyway, it's not going to be Biden, no, or Kamala, no question about that.
All right, I agree. Okay. Next question. He's talking about an episode, prior episode we did, I guess 5 or so ago. He said we talked about the significance and impact of population changes on economies and civilization. And then he shares this clip of Larry Fink of BlackRock. And Larry in this clip says, I would say that in developed countries, the biggest winners are those with declining populations. And the social problems that will arise when people are replaced by machines will be much easier to solve there. They will quickly develop robotics, AI, transform productivity, increase the standard of living, and replace people with machines. So I guess the question is, what is your take on, is reduced population necessarily a bad thing for an economy? I mean, and what effect would robotics have on it?
Well, I think robotics is going to have a gigantic effect on everything. And they're just coming into their own now. If you've kept up with these videos that occur from time to time of the devices that Boston Dynamics, among others, have come up with, these bipedal robots, they're fantastic. They can do front flips and back flips and walk upstairs and hand things off to other people that they carry. And of course, with artificial intelligence advancing at the rate that it is, they'll, for practical purposes, be able to think, and you cover them with some type of plastic, they'll actually look like people at that point. They won't look like robots. I think that's going to be the next thing. So yes, I think Larry is quite correct. Robots are the wave of the future, and they have so many different applications. The problem with a falling population is that because of these national retirement programs like Social Security, and all the Western countries have them, they're all going to go bankrupt. So people that are relying on that are not going to have what they expect. And I don't know how the robots are going to fit into that exactly.
Mm. Well, I mean, like healthcare is one of the big places where they think they can be helpful, though, at least. Maybe they offer them, I don't know. I mean, because it's the healthcare associated, especially end of life, that's a big issue, where you really need somebody to kind of take care of you for the last few years, where people like lose the ability to take care of themselves. So, and I saw something that Elon Musk was saying that they thought with he calls it Optimus Prime, the Tesla robot, that he can imagine not far in the future, a few years, that they could be producing 100 million of those robots a year. 100 million.
Why not? Because we can make 100 million cars per year. So it makes all the sense in the world that they be able to make these robots. Yeah, it's going to change everything. And of course, they'll actually be needed because in the past, parents and grandparents were taken care of by the next generation who'd basically live in the same house or at least the same close at hand community with them. That doesn't happen anymore. People live all over the country, and the thought of having your grandparents live with you is, well, it's very outre. So yeah, robots are actually going to solve a lot of these problems. Because all these old people, old boomers, who is going to take care of them, quite frankly?
Well, I gotta say, as a child of boomers who basically, said at 18, you're out the door, you don't really feel a sense of duty or obligation to them later in life when they were basically like almost resentful, for that they brought you into this world and you somehow interrupted their life flow.
Exactly. And the only other alternative is to import lots of low-life third worlders who can do that kind of work, which is going to radically change the demographics of the country, which are already changing radically anyway.
Yeah.
So robots are the answer. They're the solution, not the problem. Of course, there'll be robots will be. We really will live in the world of the Terminator. There's no question about that either.
Yeah, robots will be the solution, but they will also be a problem in some way, no doubt
Right.
about it. And I do
Well,
think especially to start to be more humanoid-like, the kind of the uncanny valley effect is going to be weird. I think it's going to be off-putting.
yeah, because they really will start looking a lot like people and become almost indistinguishable. But as has been said, life isn't just full of problems. Life is problems. So this is the next one on the runway. But maybe it's
Yeah.
a good problem more than a bad problem.
Yeah, already with Chat GTP, I've seen these videos where these women have they build a relationship with Chat GTP. They carry on conversations with it, and it acts like their boyfriend. So you can imagine now you make it in a physical form. I mean, you talk about depopulation. I mean, once these things are sex enabled, there will be no more
Work that way
reproduction.
for both sexes. This is a good subject for a science fiction novel. And of course, science fiction is a much better predictor than any think tank has ever been.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay. What does Doug think about living in El Salvador versus Nicaragua? And would you choose either one of them if you had to leave Uruguay for one reason or another?
The answer is no, I would not choose either one of them. Because things are pretty mellow at the moment in El Salvador. I haven't been there for years. It was always I'd say probably my absolute last choice for a place to live in the Western Hemisphere. But Bukele has turned that around. He's locked up 65,000 criminals. But wait a minute. What if Bukele is not reelected? What's the next president going to do with 65,000 newly incarcerated gang members? And are you going to be able to actually keep them in jail? That's another question. So it seems to me that El Salvador may be rather unstable and undesirable because it is the archetypical banana republic. It's the most densely populated country in the Western Hemisphere. It went through a civil war back in the 80s, which helped to destabilize it and create all these gangs. So, no, I think it's experiencing a pleasant and favorable hiatus with things like Silicon Beach that they're trying to build and all that. But I think it's an unstable situation, so I wouldn't choose it. And Nicaragua, they have, what's his name? Danny
Ortega?
Ortega, yes, who, hardcore communist who, but the type of communist that early on distinguished himself by buying really expensive sunglasses when Nicaragua was one of the poorest countries in the hemisphere. Of course, there are several gringo developments, and I was involved in one of them, actually, and still own a couple of lots in, what is that one called?
Rancho Santana. Rancho
Yes,
Santana.
I should know since I own a couple of lots there. But it's very nice. People that live there are happy. The government leaves them alone. They're not bothering anybody. They're a source of income and employment. But what is there in Nicaragua except hanging out with other gringos on the beach? Quite frankly, very pleasant.
Yeah,
But
I guess if you love surfing, it's good. If you love surfing,
yeah, that's a plus, and low cost of living as well. So, all that's very nice. But if you're going to look for a crib outside of the U.S. or Canada, I think your answer is Argentina or Uruguay. frankly. I mean, or maybe southern Brazil. I mean, right now they've got a hardcore socialist, essentially a criminal personality running Brazil, not good. But that could change. So, okay, those three countries, and maybe Chile will come back as being a reasonable possibility again.
Hmm.
But no need in looking to Central America. I don't think it's the land of the Frito Bandito.
Okay. Next question is curious to hear Doug's views on the post-financial meltdown world. What is likely to happen socially, financially, and the rule of law? Where's the best place to be, and who, if anyone, is it best to be with?
Well, my long-standing opinion has been that the 2020s are going to be a really unpleasant decade where all this stuff is going to come together and or I should say, fall apart, not come together. So, where do you want to go? Where do you want to be? At the moment, I'll just reemphasize this. It seems like the best place to be is Argentina because it's actually going in the right direction. And there's cause for optimism that it'll continue going in the right direction. Where else
What do,
could you go?
what do you think it looks like in the US though, a financial meltdown? What does that really look like?
Well, we've of course discussed David Webb, is that his name?
Yeah, the great
Okay.
taking.
Yeah, great taking. You from a very practical point of view, will own nothing. But you won't like it, of course. Uh, should we factor that into the equation? Probably. I don't know what the actual odds of that happening are, but possibility. Chance of a complete market meltdown. And it could take a number of forms, and it could be bonds as well as stocks, as well as real estate. That would be really chaotic for people's individual wealth as well as corporate wealth and pension plans and Social Security and all the rest of it. That seems almost inevitable in the cards. Don't know what form it'll take or exactly when it'll happen, but it's bound to be this decade. So, look, this is the decade to kind of hang on to your hat.
Okay. All right. Someone asks, is Bill Gates the most successful mass murderer of all time?
Yeah, maybe. All the precincts aren't in yet, but he's in the running.
All right. Has Doug ever studied the history of losers in a war who escaped to start anew and what lessons that might teach us? He talks about the Confederados in Brazil as an example, and also more recent and darker example, the Nazi war escapees to South America.
Yeah, I guess the Confederados are a lot of Southerners that transplanted themselves to Brazil, and their descendants all speak Portuguese, even though they look like blonde, blue-eyed Americans, of which there are plenty of blonde, blue-eyed people in Brazil anyway, Germans and so forth. But it seems to me, as you think about it, it's always bad news being on the losing side in a war. The people that, first of all, your country may be devastated in any number of ways, and the guys that win are going to take advantage of that situation, sometimes in a lot more nasty ways than others. I mean, people that the U.S. has beaten up in wars, it worked out pretty well for them because of the American character or whatnot. But the Germans in East Germany had a really rough go of it after the Russians won, and you just don't want to be on the losing side of a war. That's all there is to it.
Get out in advance. Get ahead of it. Get ahead of the trend.
Yeah, get ahead of it. I mean, look, if you can see bad things happening, or the direction is really iffy, which you might have if you were in Russia in 1917 or 18 or 19 or 20 or 21, 22, that area, see, I think I ought to get out of Dodge. And after World War I in Germany, with the chaos building and the fighting between the Nazis and the communists and other groups, why really hang around, especially after they elected Der Fuhrer? And other countries like that, Cuba, Vietnam.
Okay.
You got to have a backup. You've got to have a backup plan. And you can say, well, I can't afford a backup plan. Well, actually, whose fault is that?
Good point. And also, your ability to afford stuff is just going to continue to decrease if you're trapped in one of these areas, because they get deeply impoverished in advance of these conflicts, right? I mean, with inflation, and whether you're talking about Germany after World War I, or I mean, even just what you see in the US right now with the loss of purchasing power spiking in the last 4 years alone.
Yeah, so you want to plan ahead a little bit. You really do. And now is one of those times where it becomes especially important, I think.
Okay. Next question about Biden again. He says, many assume that Biden isn't really in charge and that the White House is being run by Obama in stealth mode. But Obama consistently sought to improve relations with Russia while in office. There was a hot mic moment in 2012 on the campaign trail where Obama told Medvedev, tell Vladimir that I will have more flexibility after the election. So doesn't the current animus toward Russia suggest that Obama isn't the one pulling the strings?
Well, I'm not a Washington insider. I lived in Washington for over 20 years and got to know lots of these horrible people. But I think now much more than, in fact, when I partially grew up in Washington, D.C., when I was a little kid there in Chicago, and it used to be that Washington was a kind of an undistinguished southern town with lots of monumental buildings and a bunch of government employees. But in the decades since then, since the 50s, and I'm sure it was much different again before, much different before Roosevelt was elected in the 30s, that now Washington is almost transformed into something like Isaac Asimov's Trantor. It's the whole thing is government and things related to government. So that, well, I don't know what.
The question is whether or not Obama is really controlling behind the scenes, or if it's someone else, because clearly somebody else seems to be running Joe.
They're all part of the deep state. That's what I was building up towards. Got a little bit distracted thinking about Washington in the old days. It's the deep state really does exist. And you have different wings of the deep state, like the people that like and pal around with the Obamaites, and people that like and pal around with the Hillary type people. But it's a snake pit where they'll all bite and eat each other. But on the other hand, they're all part of the big party. Look, it's like take another country, France. Did France, over hundreds and hundreds of years since it actually became France, let's say in the Middle Ages, did it really change much when a new king was put in office? Well, sometimes it would, but not that much. Or England did, whether it was this guy or that guy that was the king, did it really change the character of things? Well, not much. So I think it's going to be pretty much like that with the US too, within the context of the fact that things have changed a bit. We do have a real deep state that with different aspects and different wings that runs the country. So whether it's the Obamaites that are controlling, pulling Biden's strings, or the Hillaryites, or some other group that we may not even be thinking about, it's like changing the course of a super tanker. It takes a long time.
Well, that kind of begs the question, what difference it would make if Trump is there again?
Well, maybe not much, because with civil service laws, he just can't wholesale fire all of these bureaucrats that infest these agencies. And the government, it seems to me, isn't really run by the president or the Congress or the Supreme Court. It's run by these giant and entrenched administrative agencies. And you can't get rid of them. They're all civil service employees.
Protected by law.
Protected by law. And especially in recent years, the new hires reflect the values of the old hires. So they're all kind of the same type of people. And yeah, I hope if Trump's elected, I mean, this is what all the MAGA people are hoping. Yeah, he's gonna clean the place up, blah, blah, blah. I think he's gonna find that he gives an order, and if it's followed, it's really half-heartedly, with people fighting actively against it the whole way.
Just like last time when he ordered troops out of Syria, and they said, yeah, we're not there anymore, but there still were.
Yeah. And the CIA and the FBI and these other Praetorian agencies are governments within the government. Their budgets are undisclosed for national security purposes. Who knows what kind of scams these guys have going on? I think they pretty much do what they want at this point.
When they specifically with Trump last time, they talked about the idea that they didn't feel comfortable sharing certain intelligence with him. So they withheld stuff from him.
Well, and how are you going to make them do that? They'll just stonewall, or, be unavailable, or come up with one excuse or another.
Right. And if it's secret, you don't know what to ask for, right? If it's classified stuff, so you have to ask for the right thing for them to give it to you.
Yeah, I think even if Trump wins, I mean, relative to anything the Democrats would put up, it would be a good thing if he wins. But all he can do is slow things down.
Yeah. All right. Next question.
The government has a life of its own, quite frankly.
It does. It seems like the best thing that could happen is there's that Supreme Court case that's been pending for a long time now. It's the Chevron case. You heard about this, where it's questioning the constitutionality of Congress delegating the law-making authority to these agencies.
Yeah.
And like if the Supreme Court said that they couldn't do that, then that would maybe unwind some of those agencies. But unless that happened, it's hard to imagine him being able to dig in there and change things.
The only way out of this is by abolishing these agencies themselves, not just firing a few people, a few especially bad apples. They're all basically either robots or bad apples, but actually abolishing the agencies and their functions, which amounts to not just pulling out the weeds, but pouring Agent Orange in the ground they grew in. And I don't see that happening, quite frankly.
Well, it's the kind of thing Milei's doing in Argentina, right?
It is the type of thing that he's doing. But the U.S. is not Argentina, because the U.S. was not nearly in the desperate straits that Argentina was. So I hope it works in Argentina. I think it's working, but I don't think it would work in the U.S. It'll be a disappointment.
Not until the U.S. turns into Argentina, then maybe.
Yeah, we got to look at the bright side. and the U.S. has quite a way to fall yet.
All right, next question. Say, I'm not a religious at all in Orthodox terms, so I'm not bound by any religion's dictates. This is more of a spiritual person. And it says, I've been pondering what is the best course someday long in the future, I hope, when I shuffle off this mortal coil. Do I want to be buried or cremated? So asking a question, is there a soul separate from the body? Would I destroy it by being cremated? Or is my soul a form that would not be extinguished by fire and therefore cremation is fine?
Mhm.
What's your thoughts on
Well,
that?
we've talked about this in the past, and uh, I think the answer is nobody knows. Uh, I mean, look, I'm partial to the fact, just being logical about these things, okay? I mean, assuming that that there's a reality beyond this physical meat one we're in right now, the thing that makes the most sense to me is that you actually are a spiritual entity that inhabits the body, as opposed to what most people think. Here you are in your body and you have a soul. No, have a soul is a long way to look at it. Maybe you are a soul, but then again, this is all conjecture, speculations. I mean, I haven't ever, people claim to have had out of body experiences, which you'd think would be a proof positive of the existence of yourself as a spiritual being. And I know people that claim that they've had them, compelling stories that I've been told by people where, like this one guy told me that he was in an airliner and he got out of his body and was outside the airliner, wide awake. What? Listen, there's all kinds of stories floating around about this stuff. I have no idea. I
Would
really
you,
don't.
do you, have you thought about whether you would be buried or cremated when you die?
Well, it's not going to be up to me. I suppose I can leave my wishes. I mean, perhaps the what some American Indians or East Indians also used to do is uh, put your body on an elevated platform so that it disintegrates naturally in the open air and the birds. Does it really make much difference? Uh, I don't think it makes any difference, quite
Yeah.
frankly.
Uh,
What do you prefer?
Well, in either case, it shouldn't make any difference. Like if there is no, well, based to me, if there is, if this is all there is, then it doesn't matter. And if you are a soul that has the body, then the body is irrelevant to it. So that doesn't matter either.
It doesn't matter either way. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
As far as, well, what should be done with a body when it dies, uh, everything put together, I think a case can be made for cremation, but that's arbitrary.
Yeah. Okay. Um, the question says this may be too involved, but can you explain derivatives and their effect on markets?
Yeah, it used to be that there were few derivatives and they weren't very important. I mean, as late as the 60s, not only weren't there exchange traded options on stocks, forget about commodities. Uh, well, there were, but they were strictly over the counter, and you had to find a broker, both a warm body and a firm that he dealt with, that actually kind of made informal markets on puts and calls and stocks. And then, it's expanded now to the extent where you got completely unsophisticated gamblers that are buying 0-day exploration options because they're very volatile. So that the tail has started wagging the dog. And of course, there are options on commodities, not just commodity futures and so forth. So what this is telling me, and of course, that I find this amazing, quite frankly, but it's factual that that trading firms fight to be a mile closer to the action so that even at the speed of light, their orders are transmitted more quickly to the center. This is all crazy. And it's all because of the amount of funny money. But the whole society's become financialized. It's become a gambling casino. People have forgotten that the reason stock markets existed was if you had a business idea, you'd round up some people and you'd all put your money together because you didn't have enough money as an individual. I mean, so it was a way of investing. And investing in productive businesses it's almost forgotten. It's all about stocks and options and trading. So I think this is going to come to an end. Hopefully with the abolition of central banks that are facilitating it all.
Yeah, and the size of the derivatives market is something like, multiple quadrillion, isn't it, at this point?
Yes, it's completely out of control. So that this tells me that it's actually a bad time to be in the stock market when there is this kind of thing going on.
Right. So the derivatives of you have the actual companies that you own equity in, you have the bonds that you own, but the derivatives of those fundamental elements are vastly larger than the underlying assets.
Yeah, the whole world is in kind of a financial bubble. And you don't need the SEC or the CFTC or other agencies to regulate it. If we lived in a true capitalist society, people would have more real savings as opposed to credit, that they would find things to invest in, and they would be presumably productive businesses as opposed to second guessing what you can do to the shorts in GameStop and AMC. This is telling us this is a very bad time to have your money put into companies that are full of stupid money.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I told you a few years ago, Jane had never had a brokerage account. And so she was setting it up as we were driving an account through Robinhood. So as we're just driving in the car. So I got to, I was kind of looking over her shoulder as she was doing it. And they asked her, what level of experience do you have, with all different types of securities? And she's like, none. And then once she completed it, it encouraged her to trade options. The first thing. She had no experience at all. I mean, I remember you used to have to apply, and then they would not grant it to you at first if you'd only had a year or two of stock trading experience.
Yeah. And brokers themselves are a double-edged sword. I mean, you can get a broker who is stupid or dishonest and guides you into ridiculous things and helps you lose all your money. But on the other hand, there are brokers that, if you're a complete tyro, can help educate you. But now it's all done with your computer. So who's going to help you? At least in the days of brokers, you'd figure out whether the broker was a good guy or a bad guy after a while. But when you're just on your own playing with your computer, well, I don't know.
You can feel like a genius one day because you're on the uptrend for GameStop, and you feel like a total loser when your account when you get margin called and you lose everything overnight.
Yeah, and certainly here in Argentina and Uruguay, I'm not associating with, kids that are playing on their computers to trade American stocks. So when I'm back in the US in a few weeks, perhaps I'll get a grip on this type of thing. But the whole thing is out of control. And maybe it doesn't seem that way to the average person because it's like a fish swimming in water. It's everywhere, this financialization. And it's going to come to a bad end. I mean, you've got to get back to the basics, and the basics are you have a stock market to raise money for productive businesses. And based on that, when you buy a stock, well, you usually hold it for a long time until the business starts paying dividends. So people don't even think about that anymore. Dividends, what are they?
Exactly. Exactly. That was the benefit of owning stocks in the beginning, is that you got paid to own them. And now you're betting on the price going up.
Yeah. So sign of the times, and not a good one, I don't think.
Okay. This next one. I read a post by Scott Ritter yesterday that gave credit to the Soviets during the D-Day invasion, where they kept the Nazis preoccupied on the eastern and northern fronts, thereby reducing the Allied casualties in Normandy. My question for Doug is, what would the outcome of World War II be if General Patton had pushed through and battled the Soviets after defeating the Nazis?
Well, question's interesting, of course, but it's kind of putting the cart before the horse, because when it came to who really won the war against Germany, it was the Soviet Union in terms of manpower or anything else that was important. I mean, look, D-Day only occurred, well, 11 months before the surrender of Germany. So that wasn't the main theater. It really wasn't that important. Now, on the other hand, if the US had not been shipping gigantic amounts of material of all types to Russia, maybe they would have collapsed earlier. But
Do you think though that yeah, I mean, most people who've seen Saving Private Ryan of my generation and younger probably just assumed that was the central battlefront, you know, that it was
no, it was actually a rounding error. So it was a distraction for Hitler relative to what was going on the Eastern Front.
right. And do you think that well, I guess it's been floating around on Twitter for during the D-Day stuff, this quote from Patton saying that we battled the wrong enemy during World War II. Have you seen that quote?
Yeah, I have. And there are lots of alternate histories you can put together. Okay, supposing when uh, the US Army was pushing east, they'd pushed much harder and conquered all of Berlin and then fought the Russians. Well, who would have won? Well, the Russians had manpower, but without uh, things that were shipped to them from the US, could they have fought the war for very long? It's a good question. I mean, the Russians didn't have nuclear weapons and wouldn't have had them within a reasonable period of time. They could have been intimidated into surrendering, and could have changed the government in Moscow. Could have happened, but there's all kinds of alternate histories. Supposing when Hitler, when the Germans were conquering France, and you had Dunkirk, there were 250,000 Allied soldiers on the beach. They could have, and actually should have, all been captured. That could have changed had a huge effect on the outcome of the war, especially if, this is another thing, the Germans had stuck just to U-boats instead of wasting all kinds of money on large surface ships, which were money pits, things like the Bismarck and the Tirpitz and that. If they'd concentrated seriously just on submarines, they really could have strangled Britain. And using submarines to defend an invasion fleet against the British Navy, maybe they could have successfully conquered Britain. And then what would have happened? The US would have had a real hard time reconquering Europe or other things. Supposing Hitler hadn't been so stupid after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, he declared war on the US the next day. Well, why? That should have been viewed as Japan's problem. instead of getting himself involved in that. There are all kinds of if come sees that.
And he had a peace agreement with the Soviet Union at first, and then he violated that, right? Is that how that worked?
Yeah, exactly. When the Germans invaded Poland, September 1st, 1939, 15 days later, the Soviets invaded and took eastern Poland. And they were allies up for the next 2 years. Well, wait a minute. Uh, uh, Good old Uncle Joe, our friend, was an ally of Hitler, splitting Poland up together. And of course, it was Germany's attack on Poland that caused the Brits to declare war on him. And so people don't think about these things other than the fact that we were the good guys, and all the movies show us that. It's pretty obvious.
Right, exactly. As we were talking about the other day, Norm Macdonald's joke about how he was studying history and noticed that how nice it was that the good guys always won.
It really is convenient. We've been so lucky the good guys always win.
All right, let's see. With the tensions high between the US and Russia over Ukraine, what's your take on the recent deployment of Russian warships to Cuba? Is this a calculated move by Putin, or is it just routine deployment? And how might the US respond considering the history between these three countries?
Well, I think he must be trying to make a point because Russia's on the other side of the world from Cuba, and it doesn't have a big navy. It's basically nuclear submarines is what Russia really has. So I think he's just trying to make a point to draw attention to the fact that it has no strategic value of any type.
Right. It does show Americans though that, it's a two-way street. It does give you a sense that they can come to your border and they can be there. And how it must feel a little bit to have NATO on Russia's border.
Yeah, exactly. So from Russia's point of view, probably a smart move for political and propaganda purposes. It's not going to change anything.
Okay. Next question. Have either of us ever been hypnotized? And if so, for what purpose?
Were you at that conference that Porter put on some years ago where he had a professional hypnotist that hypnotized a large part of the audience?
I didn't see that one. No, I wasn't there for that.
Well, it was interesting in that the hypnotist called something like 50 people up to the stage and asked them a couple of questions or had them raise their hands at some point and immediately dismissed half of the people. And apparently it was an effective way to sort out their basic psychologies, because then he managed to hypnotize all 25 people up there who obviously weren't Confederates. They were genuine audience members. So yeah, hypnosis does work. But some people, as this hypnotist demonstrated, some people are not very easily hypnotized, just not prone to it. My personal experience, I've tried it with professional hypnotists a couple of times, and it doesn't seem to work with me. It just didn't work. Other people are very prone to suggestions. So that's my experience.
I've seen those public events like that where they do it, and it is amazing how they do select them very quickly. They weed out the ones who won't work, and then they get them to do basically silly things on stage for the most part, and confuse them and about what's happening, and they forget their names or their kids' names or whatever. And it's obviously, it does work with some people. Yeah. My only real experience is it's not the same exactly, but self-hypnosis way before I started meditation. I found a book first on self-hypnosis and I started with that. And it is I did find it somewhat effective. And some people say you can't do it to yourself, but whatever it was, whatever I learned in this, it did cause you to, like, if you were tired, it could make you feel awake. It could change your attitude. It could change your physiology, things like that. I found it effective for that, but no, I've never been professionally hypnotized.
Yeah, I guess it's related to things like meditation, which you do. You get out of your monkey mind and mellow out and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's pretty interesting how it works, though. It does work on some people for sure. All right. Let's see. As the West and the US in particular become more hated by the day, do either of you envision foreign blowback against the robust collection of expat enclaves around the world? And what is your experience in the countries where you've lived with regard to local treatment?
Well, I've had very few nasty experiences in foreign countries strictly due to the fact that I was American. And I think I'm pretty obviously American. So I think that's overrated. I wouldn't worry about it too much. And yeah, the answer is no, I don't think so. It doesn't seem that way to me because people can sort out what a person is like as opposed to what his government may be like. I wouldn't be too worried about that.
Hmm.
Do you have an opinion on that?
I just say I personally haven't experienced anything negative from it. I mean, you could definitely tell in some places where you're not as welcome, where they just, is in most places as an American, as a tourist, or if you're living there, you get treated better than average.
Typically. I mean, I remember I was in the Dominican Republic only a couple of years after the Marines left. And it seemed to me that the average Dominican didn't like me very much because it was obvious I was an American. And I was in Egypt once. And, some little Arab kid who spoke English, which was interesting, was calling me out because I was an American. Well, was that things like that happen? But I think they're anomalous.
Yeah. The one thing I've seen though recently, and I don't know how, it's social media, so you don't really know, but in a couple of places in Mexico, and also certainly in Medellin, Colombia, I've seen signs of this, where basically people are organizing like the Gringo Get Out campaign around those places in parts of Mexico where the gentrification has priced people out of the market, the locals. There's some blowback there a little bit. I mean, I'll find some of the flyers that I've seen and I'll share them with you, but there's definitely a little bit of that sentiment growing, at least that I've seen on social media, not in person, in a couple of areas that might be overrun with gringos.
Yeah, maybe the key there is to try to stay away from places that are overrun with gringos.
Right.
So you're no longer an interesting oddity that people want to get to know, but part of a group that's impinging on their culture, which they don't like. Maybe that's the distinction that should be made.
Yeah, and I know that some of the reaction in Medellin is that it's a known place for sex tourism, and so you get a lot of dirtbags going there for that reason, and then that really, that has affected people, I think.
Yeah, that's the problem with nearby and cheap Latin countries, is that you get these middle-aged guys who are down on their luck and go there because there's cheap beer and cheap women, and it's all they can afford. And of course, they create a bad vibe.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What's the next question here? Have you been paying attention to anything that's going on in New Caledonia? It says, while they have become the newest independent country in the 2020s, will they become the newest independent country in the 2020s? And It says Azerbaijan and Russia are reported to be financially supporting independence activities to get back at France there.
Yeah, I wish, when I was living in New Zealand and I traveled to a lot of places in the South Pacific, I wish that New Caledonia had been one of them, but it wasn't. So what about New Caledonia? I guess their major source of income is a nickel.
A nickel mine, yeah.
And I think about 40% of the population are quote unquote natives. They call them Canucks. And they kind of resent the fact that there are a lot of relatively rich foreigners, and it's the usual drill. So I'd like to go there just to take a look. South Pacific, it's nice, but what's going to happen? Yeah, and of course, would make sense that the Russians would want to finance an upset with the French. I mean, the Americans finance upsets in all these countries all the time. So this is something that governments always do all around the world.
Yeah. All right. Is there a country that you prefer to be in when you get various healthcare checkups or treatments, or maybe preferred places for screenings or dental? It says, I know that sometimes when I'm out of the USA, I'll just get some blood work done to save a few bucks.
Yeah, well, it's not the US anymore because the US is extremely expensive and very bureaucratized. And the doctors are all employees now. 75% of them is the actual number. They're not entrepreneurs that can think for themselves. They work for big corporations. And I'm not a fan of big corporations, especially when it comes to something as individualized as medicine. So I mean, I had an operation on my foot in Mexico, and they did it was something that happened just overnight. And the Mexican medical system was fantastic and efficient, competent, and cheap. So that was good. Mexico is famous, of course, for being a place where you can have dental work done just across the border for a small fraction of what dental work costs you in the US. And they have all the most advanced equipment and the best training and all that as well. So sure, Mexico is good to look at. I've had very good luck with Argentina and Uruguay as far as their medical facilities. One disadvantage is that, especially Argentina, because of its foreign exchange controls and the fact the currency's been so weak, they're behind in terms of the most advanced and latest equipment. But the quality of the personnel is fantastic. Best place in the world, I'm sure, is Thailand. You get the best of everything, best training, best equipment. I mean, it's a big deal, medical tourism in Thailand. So if I had something that was serious that I needed to have done, yeah, I'd look at Thailand first.
Yeah. What's that hospital there? It's Bumrungrad or something like that.
Yeah, that's one, but there are actually a couple of them. They're kind of competing for your business. Yeah.
I went there and it was amazing. The facilities were amazing there. I mean, far nicer than anything I'd ever seen in the US.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I guess they're profitable and they're treating it like a real business. They get the best talent and all that. And it's not the way it is in the US anymore. You recall this quite recent scandal at UCLA where DEI has taken over the medical school to such a degree that some of the Black medical students couldn't name the parts of the heart or the arteries or anything. And what the hell are they doing in medical school? You're not doing them a favor. You're certainly not doing the patients a favor, anybody, but that doesn't happen in foreign countries.
Okay. In 2017, the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security hosted the SPARS pandemic scenario, which simulated an event shockingly similar to how the COVID pandemic played out. The recovery section of the report, chapters 17 and 18, deals with how officials could handle growing public outrage over vaccine side effects, including a national vaccine injury compensation trust fund authorized by the PrEP Act. What does Doug think of the possibility the COVID pandemic was a plan to cull the population, get the remainder accustomed to UBI, and inflate away the debt with helicopter money in the form of regular vaccine injury payments?
Well, as you know, Matt, I am not basically a conspiratorialist, but this is so fishy. Everything. I mean, about 100 different things that I can think of to do with COVID tell me that the whole thing is just rotten and stinks to high heaven. And I'm convinced that the truth will come out eventually. And it'll be a scandal of worldwide proportions. But then again, maybe there will be millions and millions of people that will die from their shots in the next few years. I mean, we'll find out whether that scenario plays out or not. But the whole thing is ill-intended and stupid and evil. That's my view on COVID and things of that nature, which are being fomented.
Okay.
Yeah, what do you? I know you would agree with that.
I don't know if, yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I don't know if these, I don't know if it's designed to depopulate, because you could argue it was not very effective at doing that, at least on any short-term schedule. I mean, I think you can make my conspiratorial argument is that they wanted to get these mRNA vaccines out there. They wanted to get this technology out there. Fauci himself stated that they needed a way to break the cycle with vaccine production to be able to do some of these things that they want to do, that they're gearing up to do with the cattle, for instance. So, and with the bird flu. So I think it's more about getting that technology out there and then maybe getting the control grid in place, where people get used to not being able to go where they want to go and get conditioned to lockdowns and QR codes and all that nonsense.
Yeah, all of that. The best we can hope for is that what I think is the truth is widely disseminated enough that these people are prosecuted and appropriately punished.
Should be. Yeah. And people have been saying Nuremberg 2.0, for almost 2 years now. And so far, we're not even getting anywhere near that.
No, nowhere near it. And a lot of it, well, certainly if the Democrats are elected in November, you can forget about it, at least for another 4 years.
Yep, I agree. All right, let's see. Let's just do a few more questions here. Doug, having lived an interesting and full life of adventure, unique experiences, good and bad business decisions, looking back, is there anything you'd change?
Yeah, I could have accelerated all the things favorable things that I've done, and prepared myself better to enable that. So once again, I'll draw people's attention to what your son Max is doing, where instead of wasting time and money, huge amounts of time and huge amounts of money being wasted, going to a college for 4 years, he's actually engaged in a program where he can maximize his knowledge and experience and everything else over that 4-year period of time, and actually be put on a proper path to maximize life experience. I mean, like almost all kids, I was just floundering, trying to figure things out, getting some good advice here, maybe some bad advice there, but no direction. Go to college because, well, that's what you do after high school if you're of a certain class or economic status or something. It's ridiculous. So, yeah, I wish that I'd had proper guidance when I was in my teens and 20s, but I didn't. It worked out okay, but it would have worked out much better if I had.
Could have saved a decade, you know?
I could have, yeah. I mean, not that it wasn't a lot of fun. I mean, that was fine, but you can have even more fun if you're grounded in all these different ways than just floating around. And
Yep, I agree. Okay, let's see. With today's endless number of chemical shortcuts that happen in our entire food chain, what does Doug think about where our food supply is going in the next few decades? And what action do you recommend people do? In your opinion, is there still time to turn things around and get back to clean food?
well, clean food. Listen, I'm all for organic, wholesome, high quality food. Uh, well, things like Twinkies and what do they call it? They actually have a name for foods that are ultra processed now. It's an acronym.
Hmm.
So they're tasty, they're convenient. I guess most people don't pay attention to that. And maybe they don't hurt you as much as some would believe because it's just chemicals. Your food is really just chemicals,
Hmm.
frankly. The same 92 atoms are in all this stuff, recombined in various ways. I don't know.
Hmm.
I can just tell you what I prefer and what I've read and what seems reasonable to me. So what's going to happen? People are bifurcating, well-educated, thoughtful people, as a general rule, I think fall down on the natural, wholesome, high quality side. And other people that can't afford that or don't think about it, just buy whatever happens to be on the shelves.
Yeah, you almost see this big kind of socioeconomic line. The people who are upper class or wealthier are usually fitter and thinner and eat better food. And then everyone, kind of the spectrum goes down to the poverty level where you find the most obesity. I mean, it's strange how that worked out.
It is strange because 200 years ago, if you were upper class, you were fat because you could afford lots of food and you didn't have to exercise as much. So being fat was a sign that you were prosperous and upper class. Things have reversed. Like a suntan now shows that you're prosperous and upper class. But 200 years ago, a suntan showed that you were out in the fields working and you were lower class. So these things have reversed.
But Jane's mom's attitude is still that if you have a tan, you're working class. Yeah, she goes out there with the big hat and gloves on, she doesn't get sun exposure.
Yeah,
Chinese.
of course. Well, I like a suntan. I don't have one right now, but I think it's good and good for you.
Yeah.
And it's better to be, it can't be too rich or too thin. It's another thing that I think is true.
All right. Let's see. What does Doug think about gold royalty streaming companies? It strikes me that some of these are just pump and dump operations.
I wouldn't go quite that far, but I think you're quite correct that the bloom is off the rose. There are lots of royalty and streaming companies out there right now. It's a great business model. Uh, Early entrance into the field did extremely well, but like Franco, Nevada, of course, is the uh, banner holder for that. But uh, now that there are so many of them, the space has become quite competitive. And in most of these companies, they don't have the expertise to do this properly the way Franco, Nevada, and some other early adopters did. So it's a good business plan, but it's been overutilized and it's not what it used to be. I agree with the comment.
Okay. All right. Just two more. Um, First one is we're seeing more and more reporting that people in Congress are getting rich from insider trading. Isn't this something completely illegal?
No,
But and there actually are a couple of, because it is actually legal for Congress members to do it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they actually pass a law that says that they can do it.
People, listen, we want to direct the question in the right way. And the problem is not that these scumbags in politics and Congress are getting rich in many different ways, not just knowing where the money is going to flow, which company is going to get it, and buying the shares before it gets there. But in point of fact, the government should have nothing, zero, to do with the economy. The government, and think about this, since it's an instrument of force, should do nothing but protect its subjects or citizens, depending on how you want to look at them, from force. That implies an army to protect you from force from without its borders, police force to protect you from force within its borders, and a court system to allow you to adjudicate disputes without resorting to force. It should do nothing else. Anything that needs doing, anything that people want and need will be provided by entrepreneurs who are there to make a buck. And you make a buck by, generally speaking, almost always over the long run, by providing the best service at the lowest cost. So the government does not do the things that it should do, and it does everything else very badly, very destructively. So the US government should be abolished except for those functions. And I would say those functions are far too important to be left for the kind of people that inevitably go to work for a government.
True. To your point about how entrepreneurs step in to fill gaps and opportunities, there actually are ETFs that allow you to essentially trade alongside of Nancy Pelosi. It's a Democratic ETF, NANC, which is up like 40% this year. So
is there a Republican one too?
There is. It's KRUZ, KRUZ, and that one is only up 16 or 18% this year.
Well, the Republicans are not as hip that way as the Democrats are. KRU. So is that a dig at Ted Cruz? Is he?
I think that's the idea. Yeah, it's Nancy and then Cruz is the idea.
I wonder if Ted has made many millions by being in Congress.
Yeah, I don't know. There was some years when he was running against Trump last, I guess in 2016, there was talk about his wife getting paid from Goldman or something. So, I'm sure they all get, they're in these positions of power. They take advantage of it. They all get rich.
It's inevitable. They always have carrots that are being dangled in front of them constantly. So, of course.
And this is how they're going to get Kamala to step aside. They're going to hang a big carrot in front of her, right, to get her to go when Biden steps down.
That's right. They'll find a ghost author to write a book for. Probably not too many speaking engagements, because that's you got to know your limitations. But it'll be on an important consulting position to some big corporations. The usual drill.
Yeah. All right, last question, Doug. What do you think about the new president of Mexico? And do you think that Mexico is moving further to the left and sometime in the near future will go the way of Venezuela?
Well, I don't think, well, I'm hoping it doesn't go the direction of Venezuela, but more than hopes, because the big problem with Venezuela was oil. It had a huge amount of oil, all the income. It's like a big pool of money that the government controlled. So it was a natural that it was be taken over by socialists. Mexico doesn't have such a thing. It's got oil, but it's got a whole bunch of other things too. So it doesn't suffer from the same dangers of that type as Venezuela did. So, but on the other hand, all indications are that I guess she's married, Scheinbaum.
Yeah, I don't know, actually.
I don't know who her husband is. It's never occurred, but apparently she's a very doctrinaire socialist, uh, maybe a communist, and you know, um, so whatever she does, whatever she can do, will act to augment the power of the Mexican state. So not good. But the Mexican people voted for her, apparently by a pretty good margin. So what are you going to do? But hey, you can say the average Mexican voter is stupid and uneducated. Well, wait a minute. The average American voter, look at who they voted in.
That's right. Yeah, apparently he was a college professor. Yeah.
Ah, there's a tip off right there.
Yeah. Yeah. And she's, there's this famous picture of her that was circulating where she's standing in front of a trans and an LGBTQ flag. So she is standing in front of those. And then there was some flyer where she's talking about diversity in her government being the big
Yeah,
priority.
none of this augurs well for Mexico. So there you have it.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there for today, Doug. Thank you very much. And we'll be back next week with more comments on the news.
I can't wait to see what they might be and what happens. Anything could happen next week.
Anything. All right. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Matt.